I stare at the ancient scrolls, tracing the 12 sons, the 12 sacred names of Israel. Yet as the promised land is divided, I feel a sudden chill. Joseph's name is completely missing. The very man who rescued Egypt from starvation. The one who mercifully forgave the same brothers who heartlessly sold him into chains and dark slavery. Jacob's cherished favorite, the lonely, exiled dreamer. Standing in his shoes, you and I are struck by his isolation. He became the second most powerful ruler in the known world, yet his name vanishes. We must ask the immediate question. What truly happened to him? The answer pulls you and me into the most emotionally overwhelming scene in all of Genesis, revealing how radical mercy and deep love can completely rewrite a broken family's history, saving us from terrifying loss. To understand why Joseph's tribe doesn't even exist today, I must first truly understand what the ancient tribes of Israel were, and how this rigid tribal system governed life in the ancient Near East. A tribe wasn't just a shared family name. It was my entire world, a fiercely protective territorial, legal, religious, and economic lifeline in the wilderness. It was the very structure dictating where my family survived, which soil fed us, who we bled beside in battle, and exactly where I built my sacred altar to God. When the brutal conquest of Canaan began under Joshua, dividing the land was the most terrifyingly consequential choice my generation faced, permanently sealing the fragile destiny of every single family for countless generations ahead. Keeping my name among the tribes meant holding a concrete inheritance, a place to plow, plant, and breathe. This 12-tribe system traces back directly to Jacob's 12 sons. He became Israel only after that dark, desperate night of wrestling with the heavenly angel in Genesis 32:28. The names of Jacob's 12 sons were first Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah; Issachar, Zebulun, the sons of Leah; then Dan and Naphtali, the sons of Bilhah, Rachel's servant; followed by Gad and Asher, the sons of Zilpah, Leah's servant; finally the 2 sons of Rachel, his deeply beloved wife, Joseph and Benjamin. 12 names, 12 distinct living sons. I would naturally expect 12 corresponding tribes to emerge. But the cold mathematics simply wouldn't align that way. The reason it all fractures is a deeply haunting story beginning in foreign Egypt, decades before we ever stood to divide the sacred land. Beside a dark deathbed where a blind, ancient man made a shocking legal declaration, permanently altering our family's fragile inheritance structure for all of time. Jacob journeyed down into Egypt near his life's bitter end, right when the gnawing, creeping famine in Canaan became absolutely unbearable. I feel his sheer shock discovering the cherished son he mourned for 22 agonizing years was not just breathing, but ruling the known world's mightiest empire. Genesis 45:26 captures the devastating impact on Jacob. His fragile heart fainted, entirely paralyzed by the unbelievable news. Yet when they repeated every desperate word Joseph had spoken, and when his blind eyes finally sensed the royal Egyptian chariots sent by Joseph to carry his frail body, the broken spirit of Jacob miraculously revived. Israel wept and whispered, "It is enough. My son Joseph still lives. I will go see him before I die." I feel his profound emotional resurrection. A father awakening after decades of suffocating grief. Jacob spent his final 17 years as a weary stranger in Egypt, dwelling in the land of Goshen, keeping Joseph close by for 17 years. That is exactly the same number of years Joseph spent safely in his father's tent before his brothers heartlessly sold him away. The ancient scroll of Genesis 47:28 records this painful detail with the haunting precision of perfect symmetry. Jacob lived in the foreign land of Egypt for 17 years, making the full, exhausting days of his earthly life 147 years. The grieving father's long life was deeply mirrored by his exiled son in two beautifully balanced, deeply poignant halves, 17 years together, 22 agonizing years entirely apart, then 17 reunited. Sensing the cold, heavy shadow of approaching death, Jacob desperately summoned Joseph. Genesis 47 captures the raw moment. Israel knew his death was imminent. He called out to his son Joseph, begging, "If I have found favor in your eyes, place your hand under my thigh. Show me true, faithful mercy. Please, I beg you, do not bury my bones in Egypt." Joseph solemnly promised. Relieved, Israel bowed his heavy head upon the wooden bed. Shortly after, a messenger warned Joseph his father was failing fast. Joseph immediately grabbed his two Egyptian-born sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Genesis 48:1. Stick with me here. The following scene is incredibly thick with ancient legal weight and overwhelming emotional sorrow, permanently defining the entire book of Genesis. Joseph fathered two sons in Egyptian exile with Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, the pagan priest of On. Genesis 41:50 reveals their heavy names and the desperate meanings Joseph intentionally chose. He named the firstborn Manasseh, weeping, "God has made me forget my terrible hardship and my father's lost house." The second he named Ephraim, crying, "God has made me fruitful in this lonely land of my affliction." These names were his raw personal testimonies, a painful memory of agonizing trauma. Battling deep gratitude for survival, Manasseh was the proud firstborn heir. Ephraim was the innocent younger brother, living under ancient Near Eastern laws. You and I know a firstborn's powerful birthright was sacred, deeply protected, and practically impossible to ever revoke. As Joseph guided his two boys into the dim sick room, Jacob weakly pushed himself up, trembling on the bed in Genesis 48. Then he did something that completely shattered all of Joseph's expectations. Instead of just offering a standard deathbed blessing to his grandsons, a completely normal, comforting tradition I would expect, Jacob delivered a shocking legal decree. Genesis 48:6 records his exact, unforgettable words. "Have you felt your identity vanish in a foreign place? I tremble as the dying patriarch whispers. Your two sons born in Egypt before I arrived are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh are mine, just like Reuben and Simeon. I feel so lost," as he croaks. "But any children you father after them will be yours. They shall inherit under their brothers' names." I watched Jacob formally adopt Joseph's boys, a binding, legal act with immediate, massive hereditary consequences. My lonely heart aches. Ephraim and Manasseh wouldn't just be grandsons anymore. They became Jacob's direct sons, holding the exact same legal status as Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, and the rest. I stand in the shadows, realizing this meant each boy would receive a full son's inheritance, not merely a grandson's portion. It also meant Joseph, their biological father, would legally cease to exist as a son. He lost his right to his own territorial inheritance. Because his portion was entirely divided between his two boys, these boys were now legally Jacob's sons. Why would the old patriarch do this? The ancient writings don't explicitly say, but as a fearful exile, I see layers of ancient truth unfolding that our people recognize. The first layer is the double blessing. In the harsh inheritance laws of our ancient Near East, the eldest son always received a double portion of wealth. Deuteronomy 21:17 explicitly codes this sacred principle. A father must give a double portion of everything he owns. Jacob's eldest was Reuben. But my mind flashes to Reuben's shameful temptation, losing his birthright by sleeping with Bilhah, his father's concubine. Sin carries a heavy price. Genesis 35:22, confirmed in 1 Chronicles 5:1. The sacred birthright passed to another. I stand in silent awe. by adopting Joseph's two boys and giving each the full inheritance of a son. Jacob was effectively granting Joseph that massive double portion meant for the true firstborn. Through his sons, Joseph was quietly receiving twice what any other brother would get. It was the firstborn's blessing, redistributed to preserve Jacob's deep love for Joseph, while barely avoiding completely shattering the fragile order among the deeply jealous other brothers. The second layer deals with our fragile memory. By making Ephraim and Manasseh his legal sons, Jacob ensured Joseph's name wouldn't just fade from Israel's map, but would proudly appear twice. I fear fading away like that. What looks like the tragic erasure of an identity is actually a profound multiplication. Joseph wouldn't just have one tribe, he would have two, and these two mighty tribes throughout all the subsequent bloody history of our Israel would be constantly identified as the house of Joseph or Joseph's sons in prophetic writings. Ezekiel 37:16, in the vision of two uniting sticks, explicitly mentions Joseph's stick in Ephraim's hand. Joseph's identity stubbornly persisted across the prophetic texts, unlike my own fading name. Our political and historical records throughout the deeply divided monarchy, through the prophet's era until our bitter exile. You and I know this pain. The third layer is deeply emotional, radiating clearly from the ancient text. Genesis 48:11 records Jacob telling Joseph, "I never expected to see your face, and behold, God has let me see your offspring too." This broken father, who spent 22 agonizing years weeping over his favorite boy's violently blood-soaked tunic, who utterly refused to be comforted, swearing he would go down mourning to Sheol. Genesis 37:35. This shattered father was now gazing not just at his lost son, but at his precious grandsons. I wipe a tear. This adoption was the most permanent, legally definitive, and culturally eloquent way to say, "You are mine, you always were. Everything that was brutally lost is being restored with interest." Then came the startling moment Joseph never anticipated. He carefully positioned his two frightened sons to receive the patriarch's blessing. Manasseh at Jacob's right, facing his right hand, the undeniable hand of highest honor, and younger Ephraim stood quietly at his left. It was the correct, expected arrangement, the anxious eldest son on the right, receiving the blessing from the stronger hand. Genesis 48:13, but Jacob stretched out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, who was clearly the youngest, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, deliberately. Crossing his frail arms, even though Manasseh was the firstborn, Genesis 48:14, Jacob crossed his hands deliberately. My heart pounded. This was no clumsy accident by a blind man unaware of the boy's placement, because the sacred record already established that these boys were positioned intentionally by their father Joseph. Jacob knew exactly what he was doing, and Joseph felt deeply offended by it. Genesis 48:17 records. When Joseph saw that his father had laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, it deeply displeased him. He anxiously grasped his father's frail hand, trying to remove it from Ephraim's head and force it onto Manasseh's head. And Joseph urgently pleaded with his father, "Not like this, my father, for this one is the true firstborn. Put your right hand on his head." But Jacob stubbornly refused, and the words he used to explain his refusal are some of the most theologically dense in all of Genesis. Genesis 48:19, "I know, my son, I know. He also will become a mighty people, and he also will be great. But his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall become a multitude of nations." You and I must catch this. The Hebrew phrase Milo Hagyim is truly exceptional. It is the exact same phrase that later rabbinic texts would deeply associate with the idea of total completeness. Jacob was fiercely declaring that Ephraim's outcast descendants would become the final completion, Have you felt your destiny shatter in a heartbeat? He blessed us, placing young Ephraim before Manasseh, sealing our fate. Genesis 48 verse 20. I watched the old patriarch repeat a haunting cycle. This very pattern had scarred his own restless life. Just as it had marked the lonely paths of our weary ancestors, Isaac alone carried the heavy promise. Not older Ishmael. The younger boy became the heir of our sacred promise, not the natural firstborn. Even Jacob himself stole the blessing that belonged to the wild hunter Esau, the second son rising over the first. I still tremble at that deception, an act so severe it cost Jacob 20 bitter years of exile from home. And now Jacob repeats this heavy cycle. He crossed his fragile hands, switching the grandson's order just as deliberately as his blind father once elevated him. Yet I saw no trickery this time. This quiet reversal was entirely conscious. Spoken aloud, free from the shadows of our past deceits. The youngest child, once again the smallest of the family, receiving the far greater, terrifying blessing. This unbroken chain was far too precise to be an accident, choosing Ephraim over Manasseh triggered massive shifts in our shared history, shaking our very foundation for centuries. Ephraim eventually rose to violently dominate our northern kingdom. After the monarchy tore apart in 931 before Christ, 10 lonely tribes tore away from Judah and Benjamin, leaving us deeply fractured. Our fierce prophets started using the name Ephraim to mean the entire broken northern kingdom, erasing my old local identity. It was no longer just one isolated tribe, but the massive, wandering collective of 10 tribes that bitterly abandoned the holy city. The prophet Hosea cries out the name Ephraim more than 30 times. Speaking to our deeply lost northern kingdom, Isaiah 7 verse 2 speaks of Damascus and Ephraim as twin shadows terrifying the people of Judah. Jeremiah 3 verse 9 desperately records a promise of healing, crying out, I am Israel's father and Ephraim is my firstborn. God used young Ephraim's name to hold the terrifying weight of our entire northern exile. That ancient deathbed blessing from Jacob had truly worked. Though we wandered blindly for generations before we actually saw it come to pass. Ephraim was no stronger than Manasseh while Joshua led us, or during the brutal days of our first judges. But as the dark years passed, Ephraim exploded in sheer numbers, terrifying political influence, and vast, sprawling territory across our beloved ancestral lands. It entirely fulfilled the strange vision of that frail, dying man who had stubbornly crossed his frail hands over 2 boys inside a suffocating, alien room in ancient Egypt. But where did that leave my identity in the sacred math of 12 tribes? If Jacob claimed both boys as his own, and both gained their very own territory when our harsh lands were divided, we would suddenly have 13 tribes, not 12. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, and Benjamin. 11 original, blood-bound sons of our weary patriarch Jacob. Adding Ephraim and Manasseh to replace Joseph makes 13. The solitary answer hides deeply within my brothers in Levi. Levi received no land, left homeless when Canaan was carved up. Numbers 18 verse 20 reveals the stunning, direct word from heaven above. The Lord spoke directly to Aaron, You shall have absolutely no inheritance in their land, nor any portion among them. I am your portion and your sole inheritance among the wandering children of Israel. Deuteronomy 18 verses 1 and 2 confirms my fear. The Levitical priests, the displaced tribe of Levi, shall have no inheritance with Israel. They shall simply eat the Lord's offerings made by fire, and the hollow inheritance given to them. Therefore, they shall have no land among their brothers. The Lord is their only possession, just as he promised. The lonely Levites received no continuous, permanent territory of their own. Instead, they were violently scattered across 48 isolated cities. Dispersed like dust throughout the vast territory of Israel, Joshua 21 painfully lists every single one, offering nothing but thin pasture lands around each town for their struggling flocks. The terrifying reasoning felt both deeply spiritual and ruthlessly practical. As priests and tired, ministers heavily burdened with teaching the strict law across the whole span of Israel, my Levite brothers needed to remain scattered everywhere. Never allowed to find comfort in one safe geographic region, the very tribe burdened with the holy priesthood as their sole birthright paid a terrifying price, having no true home of their own, forever doomed to wander as lonely strangers among everyone else. That is how the relentless math protected our 12 territorial tribes. The 11 remaining sons of Jacob, ripping away Joseph and landless Levi, perfectly balanced by adding the 2 restless replacement tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, Joseph's displaced boys. 11 minus 2 plus 2 equals 11. Then, keeping homeless Levi outside the borders equals 12. Our fragile structure survived. The terrifying, sacred number remained perfectly intact, and the mighty name of Joseph, instead of fading into dust, echoed twice over, surviving through the 2 panicked sons that a frail, dying father seized upon a dark Egyptian bed. Numbers 26, our second terrifying census out in the brutal, barren wilderness, harshly tallies the scattered tribes and all their exhausted military ranks. The original name Joseph completely vanishes from the scroll, replaced entirely by the new tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, each bearing its own heavy burden. Each recorded as an independent unit, desperately trying to prove they belonged among the tribes. And our painful land division described in Joshua 16 and 17 finally confirms this. The children of Joseph, Manasseh and Ephraim, received their vast inheritance. Joshua 17 verse 18 exposes a bitter complaint those boys brought directly to Joshua. Why have you given us only one desperate lot and one small portion? We are a massive people, and the Lord has heavily burdened us with growth until now. Joshua fired back without pity. If we were so large, we must march into the dark forest and violently carve space. That double portion bred crushing expectations, but Joshua refused to yield. You and I must wonder, what happened to the fragile memory of Joseph as our dark history brutally marched forward? His name never truly vanished. It reappears when my people need hope. I sing Psalm 80 verse 1 in my exile. Our northern cry begins with this plea. Hear us, shepherd of Israel, leading Joseph like a lost flock. Then the prophet Amos chapter 5 verse 6 warns me. Seek the Lord and live, before fire consumes Joseph's house, in my deep loneliness. Ezekiel chapter 37 verse 19 offers a vision of my broken people reuniting. Watch, for I will take the stick of Joseph, held by Ephraim along with the scattered tribes of Israel. I will join them to Judah's stick, making them one in my hand. For us facing total ruin, Joseph's name became a hidden code, preserving the true identity of our shattered northern tribes. It stood as our shared inheritance, the only sacred link tying Ephraim and Manasseh back to my ancient, forgotten origins. Revelation chapter 7, verses 4 through 8 names the 144,000 sealed from Israel. That list includes Joseph, alongside Manasseh. Yet it leaves out Dan and Ephraim. You and I must wonder why this mysterious ancient record completely ignores the older tribal lists we desperately clung to. Missing Dan terrifies me. This silent erasure has sparked endless, dark rumors. Early teachers like Irenaeus and Hippolytus whispered the dark enemy would rise from Dan, pulling from Jeremiah chapter 8 verse 16, and Jacob's solemn blessing in Genesis 49 verse 17. Seeing Joseph beside Manasseh, but losing Ephraim entirely, deepens my fear of fading away. Yet this strange final vision gives me one solid comfort. Joseph's identity survived the crushing darkness. It lived on in my people's broken memory, anchoring our sacred faith all the way to the final pages of the holy text. I feel a bitter irony in Joseph's path, hidden right inside our family borders. A man sold by his own flesh and blood for 20 silver pieces, dragged into the suffocating sands of Egypt as a nameless slave, falsely accused, locked in a cold cell, completely alone. Yet he rose to rule, watching his brothers bow down, totally blind to who he really was. This rejected outcast did not just get one single tribe. He got two. The same brother they violently threw out of the family circle suddenly found his rightful place in Israel doubled. The favorite son, suffocated by his father's heavy, unequal affection. That blind devotion bred a poisonous, consuming hatred among the brothers, shattering my entire family and plunging us into bitter tragedy. Yet that broken boy walked away with the grandest inheritance, a double portion, his identity stamped twice across our lands. Genesis chapter 50, verses 19 through 21 guards the words Joseph whispered to his terrified brothers right after our patriarch Jacob finally passed away. Do not be terrified. Am I standing in the mighty place of God? You truly plotted wicked evil against my life, but God shaped that darkness into pure good, saving countless desperate souls from starvation today. So let go of your dread. I will feed you and your starving children. He healed their brokenness, speaking peace to my soul, the strongest man in my bloodline. He had every right to crush us, yet he buried the bitter betrayal, choosing to embrace a much higher, divine calling. And God carved that holy purpose right into the soil. He made it forever visible through the very borders of my people's scattered tribes. Where one single name belonged, two proudly stood. Joseph's own tribe is totally missing. Yet his massive legacy covers every single corner of my ancestral homeland. It was split, multiplied, and doubled by a frail, blind patriarch. He crossed his trembling hands over two young boys and simply declared his blessing, with the sharp wisdom of a man who suffered deeply. He knew the forgotten younger son sometimes claims the greatest destiny. I know, my son, I know. If you and I found hope in this vanished tribe that lived twice, make sure to subscribe and share this truth. Tell me, what rating does our desert journey deserve? Yeah.